All right, let's get into one of history's most jaw-dropping collapses. We're talking about the Athenian superpower. How, at the absolute height of its glory, did it lose, well, everything? We're going to dive into the final, fatal years of the Peloponnesian War to figure it out.
You know, it's a question you hear again and again throughout history. How does a city, a power, at the very peak of its game, commanding this huge, wealthy empire, just find itself completely defeated in a little over a decade? To really get the fall of Athens, we have to unpack this incredible story of ambition, betrayal, and just fatal miscalculation.
I mean, the timeline here is just staggering. Think about it. In 415 BC, Athens is launching the biggest naval expedition the Greek world has ever seen. Just 11 years later, 11 years, by 404 BC, its walls are being torn down, its empire is gone. This wasn't some slow, graceful decline. No, this was a cliff dive, a catastrophic collapse.
So where did it all start to go wrong? Well, you can trace the beginning of the end to one single monumental gamble: the decision to invade the island of Sicily. This was supposed to be the masterstroke, you see, the move that would cripple Sparta's allies and lock in Athenian dominance for generations. Instead, it became the anchor that dragged Athens right to the bottom of the sea.
And listen, the historian Thucydides, a guy who actually lived through all this, he did not mince words. He called the Sicilian expedition, and I'm quoting here, the greatest Hellenic action, to the vanquished, the most calamitous of defeats. It was, in his eyes, an absolute, unmitigated catastrophe, one from which Athens would never, ever recover.
So, what exactly went wrong? Well, right from the very start, this whole mission was just plagued by divided leadership. You had the charismatic but frankly reckless General Alcibiades pushing for the invasion, and then on the other side you have Nixius, a much more cautious general who thought the whole thing was a terrible mistake. So with your commanders pulling in opposite directions, you're already on shaky ground. But the real turning point? It came when Athens made a fateful decision back home. They recalled Alcibiades to stand trial.
And this is where the story just takes a wild turn. Alcibiades, the guy who designed the whole invasion, he refuses to go home. Instead, he defects to the enemy, to Sparta. And he doesn't just defect, he gives them a treasure trove of intelligence. He tells them exactly how to beat the Athenians in Sicily, and then, for good measure, how to strike right at the heart of Athens itself.
The result of all this? The near-total annihilation of the Athenian force. We're talking about an army and a navy of almost 40,000 men. Gone. And this wasn't just a loss of bodies, it was the loss of an entire generation of skilled rowers and veteran soldiers. It was a military disaster on a scale that's frankly hard to even imagine.
Now, news of the defeat in Sicily sent shockwaves all across the Aegean. Suddenly, Athens looked vulnerable, and its enemies, and, even its so-called allies, they could smell blood in the water. That defeat didn't just cost Athens an army, it cost them their aura of invincibility.
And right here, the whole dynamic of the war just flips on its head. Before Sicily, it was basically a fight between Greek powers. But afterwards, as you can see, a whole new player enters the game, the Persian Empire. Seeing a chance to weaken their old enemy, the Persians start funneling huge amounts of money directly to Sparta. And this just creates a domino effect. With all that Persian gold, Sparta can suddenly afford to build a navy that can actually rival Athens. And this is crucial, they can pay their sailors more. At the very same time, key Athenian allies, seeing that Athens is weak, they start to revolt. That means Athens loses the tribute money and the resources, like timber for ships, that it desperately needed.
So, with its empire crumbling and its treasury shrinking, Athens finds itself caught in a strategic vice. And as the historians Thucydides and Xenophon tell it, two key Spartan moves in these final years of the war would tighten the noose and ultimately strangle the city into submission. So the first move came directly from Alcibiades' advice. The Spartans set up a permanent fort at a place called Decelia, just a few miles from Athens. This cut the city off from its own farmlands. As Thucydides tells us, this just bled Athens dry. Over 20,000 slaves escaped. Food shipments had to be brought in by sea at huge expense. Athens basically became a city under a permanent, year-round siege.
And that brings us to the final blow. In 405 BC, at a place called Aegospotami, the brilliant Spartan admiral Lysander set this masterful, ruthless trap. For 4 days straight, he refused to fight the Athenian fleet. He just lulled them into a false sense of security. And then, on day 5, he waited for the perfect moment, when the Athenian crews had all scattered onto the beach to find food.
and he launched a devastating surprise attack.
And this, right here, shows you the result. It wasn't really a battle, it was a massacre. In a single afternoon, the entire Athenian navy, the last real defense the city had, was captured or destroyed. Of their 180 ships, only about a dozen managed to escape. Athens was now completely and totally defenseless.
But hold on. Were these military disasters, Sicily, Tassilia, Aegospotami, were they the true cause of Athens' defeat? Or were they just symptoms of a deeper, more profound problem? For that answer, we have to turn back to our man Thucydides. He offers a really powerful and honestly unsettling explanation.
See, for Thucydides, the chain of events that led to Athens' ruin was actually set in motion long before the invasion of Sicily. He says it all began decades earlier, with the death of the city's great statesman, Pericles. In his absence, Thucydides argues, a new kind of leader, the demagogues, took over, and they prioritized their own personal power over the good of the city. And in the end, Thucydides delivers this absolutely stunning verdict. Athens wasn't ultimately defeated by Sparta. It wasn't defeated by Persian gold. Athens defeated itself. The disastrous decisions, like recalling Alcibiades, all came from leaders who were, in his words, busy with their own personal intrigues. He concludes that Athens was, quote, destroyed by their own internal strife.
And that leaves us with a question that feels, well, timeless, doesn't it? For all the external threats a nation or a power might face, is the greatest danger really the one that comes from within? The story of Athens suggests it just might be.